Imagine you're peacefully chewing gum in Singapore, but suddenly you're hit with a hefty fine. Or you're simply trying to grow a beard in 18th century Russia, but it ends up costing you. Throughout history, laws have shaped our societies, but some are so strange they leave us wondering, what were they thinking? Today, we're looking into the top 10 most unusual laws in history. And trust me, these are laws you'll never forget. From a town banning UFOs from landing in vineyards to attacks on beards. Yes, beards. These laws are bizarre, shocking, and downright fascinating. But the weirdest law? You won't believe what takes the #1 spot. It's out of this world, literally. Stay tuned till the end, and let's unravel the mysteries behind these jaw-dropping rules. Before we get started, I want to hear from you. What's the weirdest law you've ever heard of? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Historic Top 10 for more mind-blowing insights from history. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a fascinating story. Now, let's hop in. Law number 10. Ancient Rome, 9 AD, Lex Papia Papia. Single people penalized. Let's kick off this countdown with a law that might just make modern singles everywhere thankful they didn't live in ancient Rome. At number 10, we have the Lex Papia Papia. Back in 9 AD, the Roman Emperor Augustus introduced a law that would shake up the social order. The Lex Papia Papia was designed to encourage marriage and, more importantly, procreation among the Roman elite. But here's the kicker. If you stayed single for too long, you were penalized. Now, why would the emperor care so much about people's love lives? It turns out, Augustus was worried about the declining birth rate among the upper classes. He believed that by pushing people to marry and have children, he could ensure the survival of Rome's most powerful families and its future leaders. Here's where it gets really harsh. Unmarried individuals couldn't inherit property. Imagine losing your family's wealth simply because you didn't tie the knot. Augustus wasn't just encouraging marriage. He was practically making it a requirement for financial survival. It's wild to think that a society would go to such lengths to control personal choices like marriage. Today, we value personal freedom, but in ancient Rome, staying single wasn't just a personal decision. It was practically a crime. The rest of the list only gets stranger from here, so keep watching. Law number 9. United States, 1907, Bear Wrestling Prohibition. At number 9, we're heading to the United States for a law that might leave you scratching your head. Imagine watching a wrestling match, not between two people, but between a human and a bear. Yep, that was a thing, and it was big enough to get banned in Alabama in 1907. In the early 20th century, Alabama passed a law prohibiting bear wrestling matches. Yes, you heard that right. Bear wrestling was actually a popular form of entertainment back then. People would pay to watch individuals try their luck and strength against a literal bear. But as bizarre as it sounds, this law had a pretty serious purpose. It was introduced to prevent animal cruelty and ensure public safety. Unsurprisingly, wrestling a bear wasn't exactly a safe or ethical spectacle for anyone involved. What's even more surprising is just how popular bear wrestling was at the time. It wasn't just a fringe activity. It drew crowds and had its own subculture. Some people even trained bears specifically for these matches, which only added to the public outcry. The fact that such a law was necessary tells you everything you need to know about the wild entertainment trends of the past. Today, it's hard to imagine an event like this even being proposed, let alone widely attended. So, what's your take on this one? Do you think you would have been brave or maybe reckless enough to try bear wrestling if you lived back then? Let us know in the comments. Law number 8. England, 16th century, Tudor Vermin Axe, killing nuisance animals. For our next entry, let's travel back to 16th century England, where protecting your crops wasn't just a personal responsibility. It became a matter of national law. Coming in at number 8, we have the Tudor Vermin Axe, a legal system that might sound like the plot of a medieval action movie. During the Tudor period, England's rulers were so fed up with pesky animals like foxes, crows, and rats destroying crops and livestock that they put a bounty on their heads. Yes, they actually paid people to hunt and kill these so-called vermin. It wasn't just encouraged. It was a legal obligation in many communities. The logic was simple. The country relied heavily on agriculture, and with pests wreaking havoc on food supplies, it was an economic disaster waiting to happen. By turning pest control into a paid gig, they motivated everyday citizens to step in and protect their communities' livelihoods. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. Parishes were required to keep detailed records of every animal killed and every bounty paid. Imagine someone in your town keeping a literal kill count for foxes and crows. It's almost like a medieval scoreboard. Some communities even competed to see who could eradicate the most pests. The idea of placing legal bounties on animals might feel like something straight out of a video game today, but back then, it was serious business. It shows just how creative and extreme governments could get when faced with a problem. Can you imagine if they did this for modern pests like mosquitoes? People would be lining up with fly swatters in hand. So here's a question. If you lived back in Tudor England, would you have joined the pest bounty hunt? And what modern pest would you love to see bounties placed on today? Let me know in the comments and stick around. There are even stranger laws ahead. Law number 7. England 1314 football banned in London. Next on our list, we're diving into a law that would shock millions of fans today. Imagine a world where your favorite sport was outright banned. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was just too noisy. In 1314, King Edward II issued a proclamation banning football. Yes, the same football or soccer that's now celebrated by billions around the world. But back then, it was a very different game. Forget organized teams or shiny stadiums. Football in medieval England was more like a chaotic free-for-all, with dozens of players, no clear rules, and plenty of shouting and chaos. So why did Edward II step in? The king believed that football was causing too much disruption in London. People were skipping work to play, fights were breaking out, and the noise was driving the city into disarray. For a ruler trying to maintain order in medieval England, this was a major headache. But here's the wild part. The ban didn't work. Despite Edward's proclamation, people continued to play football, often in secret. The game's popularity was so unstoppable that the ban had to be reissued multiple times in the years that followed. It seems even medieval England couldn't resist the call of the pitch. Looking back, it's almost unimaginable that one of the world's most beloved sports was once seen as a public nuisance. It's a reminder that what we cherish today as tradition often started as rebellion against the rules. So, here's a fun question. If you lived in medieval London, would you have risked playing football despite the ban? And do you think the game was worth all the chaos? Law number 6. England, 1571, mandatory wool caps. Now, let's talk about a law that might leave you scratching your head and your scalp. Imagine being legally required to wear a specific hat on certain days of the week. At number 6, we have England's 1571 law mandating that everyone over the age of 6 wear wool caps on Sundays and holidays. Yep, it was all about keeping warm and keeping the economy afloat. In 1571, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, England passed a law that made it mandatory for most people to wear wool caps on Sundays and holidays. The only exception, nobility. If you were part of the upper class, you got a free pass on this one. This wasn't just about style, it was all about economics. The wool industry was a cornerstone of England's economy at the time, and this law was designed to boost demand for wool and support domestic production. By making wool caps a legal requirement, the government was essentially turning its citizens into walking advertisements for the industry, and they weren't messing around with enforcement. If you didn't wear your wool cap, you could be fined 3 farthings a day. That might not sound like much now, but back then, it was enough to make people think twice before stepping out. It's hard to imagine a world where the government dictates your wardrobe, but back in the 16th century, this kind of top-down control wasn't so uncommon. Today, the idea of being fined for not wearing a hat sounds downright absurd. So, what do you think? Would you have rocked your wool cap proudly back then? Or would you have risked the fine to go hat-free? Law number 5. United States, 1867, San Francisco's ugly law. Coming in at number 5, we have a law that's both shocking and heartbreaking. A reminder of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. In 1867, San Francisco passed what became known as an ugly law, a piece of legislation that will leave you shaking your head. This law prohibited people who were maimed, deformed, or diseased from appearing in public spaces. Yes, you heard that right. If you had any visible physical differences, you could be fined or even removed from the streets for simply existing in plain sight. The reasoning behind this cruel piece of legislation? Officials claimed it was to maintain public order and aesthetics. But let's be honest. This was an outright discriminatory attack on vulnerable individuals, designed to push them out of public life and hide them from society's view. Here's the part that might shock you the most. These so-called ugly laws weren't unique to San Francisco. They popped up in other cities across the U.S., and in some places, they weren't officially repealed until as late as the 1970s. That means for over a century, these laws continued to cast a shadow over people's rights and dignity. It's hard to fathom a world where people were judged and punished simply for their appearance. But this law is a stark reminder of the biases that shaped our history. Today, it's unimaginable. But it wasn't that long ago that this kind of discrimination was written into the law. So, what are your thoughts on this? Law number 4, United States, 1924, donkey in bathtub ban. Alright, we're entering the territory of oddly specific laws with this one. At number 4, we've got a piece of legislation from Arizona that might sound like the setup for a joke. A law banning donkeys from sleeping in bathtubs. Yes, it's real. And yes, there's a wild story behind it. In 1924, Arizona passed a law that prohibited donkeys from sleeping in bathtubs. While this might sound like a completely random rule, it was actually inspired by a very real and very chaotic incident involving a donkey, a bathtub, and a flood. Here's what happened. A rancher in Arizona had a donkey that loved to nap in an old, abandoned bathtub on his property. It seemed harmless enough, until one day, a nearby dam broke, and the entire area was flooded. The poor donkey, still lounging in the bathtub, was swept miles away by the rushing water. Rescuing the donkey turned into a massive ordeal. It required a coordinated effort, a lot of manpower, and significant resources, all of which cost the local government a small fortune. Afterward, lawmakers decided to ensure this kind of chaos would never happen again by banning donkeys from sleeping in bathtubs altogether. And believe it or not, that law is still technically in effect today. The sheer specificity of this law makes it one of the strangest on the books. It's not every day that an animal in a bathtub inspires legislation, but back in 1924, it made perfect sense. Today, it's a quirky piece of history that reminds us just how creative laws can get. So, here's a fun question. If this law didn't exist, what other bizarre animal scenarios do you think could have inspired similar rules? Law number 3, England 18th century beard tax. Alright, get ready for one of the most bizarre and personal laws in history. At number 3, we're talking about a tax that targeted something millions of people hold near and dear to their identity. Their beards. Yes, in 18th century England, and inspired by Tsar Peter I of Russia, facial hair became a taxable offense. Picture this. It's the 18th century, and you've spent months growing the perfect beard, a symbol of power, wisdom, and maybe even rebellion. But suddenly, your beard isn't just part of your style, it's a liability. Tsar Peter the Great of Russia, trying to modernize his country, imposed a tax on facial hair to encourage men to adopt the clean-shaven look of Western Europe. England followed the trend, turning beards into a source of income for the crown. Why tax beards, you ask? Tsar Peter saw beards as outdated and backward, a relic of old traditions that didn't fit with his vision of a modern, European-inspired Russia. By taxing facial hair, he hoped to force his subjects to abandon their old-fashioned ways and embrace a clean-shaven, progressive image. England, similarly, was inspired to align its upper class with modern European trends. Here's where it gets even stranger. If you wanted to keep your beard, you had to pay the tax and carry a special token as proof of payment. Imagine walking around with a beard license just to avoid getting fined. And without that token, you'd face the possibility of having your beard forcibly shaved on the spot. Talk about an invasive law. Think about it, today, growing a beard is a personal choice, and often a statement of individuality. But back then, it was literally a privilege you had to pay for. The idea of being taxed for something so personal, something that literally grows out of your face, is as absurd as it is fascinating. It's a reminder of just how far governments will go to control trends and behavior. So here's a fun one for you. Would you have paid the beard tax to keep your facial hair? Or would you have given in to the razor? Coming in at number 2 is a law that might sound like science fiction, but it was all too real. Imagine waking up one day and finding out that the calendar had skipped ahead by 11 whole days. That's exactly what happened in England in 1751, thanks to the Calendar New Style Act. In the mid-18th century, England was still using the Julian calendar, which was out of sync with the solar year by about 11 days. To fix this, Parliament passed the Calendar Act, which aligned England's dates with the more accurate Gregorian calendar that much of Europe had already adopted. The solution? They simply skipped 11 days. September 2nd, 1752, was immediately followed by September 14th. The reasoning behind this massive calendar overhaul was practical but complicated. The Julian calendar had been in use since 45 BCE and had accumulated inaccuracies over centuries. Seasons were shifting out of sync with the calendar, which caused issues for agriculture, holidays, and more. Moving to the Gregorian calendar was a way to get things back on track and in line with the rest of Europe. But as logical as it sounds now, back then, it didn't sit well with everyone. Here's where things got wild. Many people in England protested the change, claiming that the government had stolen 11 days of their lives. They demanded, "Give us back our 11 days." Some even feared that wages and rents would be unfairly shortened. The sheer outrage over something as intangible as lost days shows how deeply people were attached to their old way of life. The idea of losing time because of a law is almost impossible to fathom today. It's not like we can imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out it's suddenly 11 days later. But in 1751, this drastic measure was the only way to realign the country's calendar with reality. It's a fascinating glimpse into how even practical changes can spark chaos. What would you have done if you lived in 1751? Joined the protests or just gone with the flow? And can you imagine waking up one day and realizing 11 days of your life were just gone? Law number 1. France, 1954. UFOs banned from landing in vineyards. And here we are, the number 1 most unusual law in history. This one takes us to France, a country known for its wine, its culture, and apparently its protection against alien invasions. Yes, in 1954, a French town passed a law banning UFOs from landing in vineyards. This is not a drill, and it's definitely not a sci-fi movie plot. In 1954, the mayor of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, a quaint town famous for its vineyards and wine, issued a decree forbidding unidentified flying objects, UFOs, from landing in or flying over the town's vineyards. The reasoning? To protect the precious grape harvest and, ultimately, their wine production. Because, let's face it, even extraterrestrials shouldn't mess with good wine. So why on earth, pun intended, did this law come about? The 1950s were a time of heightened fascination with UFOs and extraterrestrial life. Reports of flying saucers were making headlines around the world, and people were genuinely concerned about alien encounters. The mayor of Châteauneuf-du-Pape decided to take no chances. Protecting his town's livelihood, and its most prized asset, wine, was the top priority, even if that meant legislating against little green men. What's even more incredible is that no UFO had ever actually been spotted in the region. But that didn't stop the town from taking this law seriously. And here's the kicker. The decree is technically still in effect today. That's right. If an alien ship decided to crash land in a vineyard tomorrow, it would be breaking the law in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. A law banning UFOs sounds more like something out of a science fiction movie than real legislation. It's a mix of fear, imagination, and a touch of humor, all wrapped up in a serious decree. But if there's one thing we've learned from history, it's that even the strangest laws can have their place, especially when it comes to protecting something as sacred as wine. Now here's the question. If UFOs were real, would they respect this law, or would they risk landing for a glass of fine French wine? And there you have it. 10 of the most unusual laws in history, from banning UFOs to taxing beards and even outlawing football. These laws may seem strange now, but they offer a fascinating glimpse into the quirks, priorities, and even fears of the societies that created them. Now it's your turn. Which of these laws surprised you the most? Or do you know of another bizarre law that didn't make the list? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this trip through history's oddities, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to Historic Top 10, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a dive into the weird and wonderful past. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.